Hello, dear students. I hope you're all well. We continue our course of lectures on physiology, and today we're gonna discuss about physiology of behavior, higher intellectual functions. And first of all, we will examine learning. What is learning? Learning is the most characteristic ability of humans and higher animals. This process makes an individual possible to change his behavior according current needs and environment changes. Learning and memory are the functions of nervous system based on conditioned and unconditioned reflexes. What is conditioned reflex? Conditioned reflex is a reflex response to a stimulus which doesn't elicit the response itself but acquires after repeated application with another species stimulation that normally evokes such a response. Conditioning equals training. Uh, there are some differences between unconditioned and conditioned reflexes. Unconditioned reflexes, they are inborn, inherited, stable and constant, activity of low nerve centers, adequate stimulation only, specific for species and based on the certain reflex arc. Unconditioned reflexes give certain adaptation. But conditioned reflexes acquired during life. They may be established or abolished. Activity of cortical higher centers. Any stimulus may be conditioned. They are individual, based on a temporary connection of neurons and give better adaptation for us. Characteristics. Variability, which is the most characteristic feature of a conditioned reflex, ensure the body's adjustment to the external environment. A conditioned signal that gives incorrect information on the external environment ceases to be a stimulus for responsive behavior and the reaction to such a signal disappears. This phenomenon is based on internal inhibition, which causes a sensitive discrimination among stimulus according to their physiological and biological properties, and which helps the body dispense with conditioned reflexes that are no longer biologically useful. The conditioned reflex warns person about approach of the subsequent kinds of activity and prepares them for future kinds of activity. For example, eating, avoidance of danger, etc. With the help of the conditioned reflex mechanism, such function of nervous system as purposeful behavior of the person in an environment and society, the adaptation to varied conditions of an environments are carried out. Such activity of nervous system concerns to the higher nervous activity. Classification of conditioned reflexes. There are several classifications. First is according to biological importance. There are nutritional, defensive, sexual, homeostatic, etc. According to reflex reactions, motor, visceral, cardiac, secretory, etc. Third, according to base reflexes, first order reflex, second order reflex, high order reflex. Fourth, according to time period, classic, traced, and reflex for time. According to receptors, different types of receptors, exteroceptive, interoceptive, and proprioceptive reflexes. according to Basel methodic, natural and instrumental or artificial reflexes. Characteristics and features of conditioned reflexes. Depending on the stimulus causing the reflex, conditioned reflexes are classified as either natural or artificial. Natural conditioned reflexes are evoked by the inherent properties of an unconditional reinforcement that have biological significance for an animal, for example, the sight and the smell of food, etc. Artificial conditions are evoked by stimuli that are initially unconnected to a reinforcement. For example, a bell, a light, or the sound of metronome. There are some rules for conditioned reflexes occurring. First rule, combination of two stimuli. Conditioned stimulus must be the first in order, and unconditioned stimulus must follow it. Second rule, conditional stimulus is at first relatively neutral, indifferent, and evokes orientation reflex. The goal is to suppress this reaction by applying the conditioned stimulation several times. Next rule for conditioned reflex, both stimuli must be more intensive than threshold. Intensity of unconditioned stimulus must be more than intensity of conditioned one. For example, conditional nutritional reflex may be established if the dog is very hungry. Ringing at first neutral signal, which then becomes conditional one, is followed by some food in a few seconds, strong unconditioned reinforce. Repetitive combination of both signals provokes formation of conditional nutritional reflex, secretion of saliva. This means that now ringing provokes secretion of saliva without any food. Next rule, combination of conditioned and unconditioned stimuli must be repetitive. Formation of temporary connections requires normal active state of central nervous system, our cortex. Mechanism of conditioned reflex. Conditioned reflexes, as a rule, reproduce the structure of an unconditioned reflex, since the conditioned stimulus excites the same nerve centers as the unconditioned one. Therefore, the components of the conditioned reflex are similar to those of the unconditioned reactions. They include primary components specific for the type of reflex and secondary unspecific components. In the defensive reflex, the leading role is played by the motor component, the nutritional reflex by the motor and secretory components. Pavlov's concept. Conditional reflexes are built on the basis of unconditional ones. The building of a conditional reflex is based on the formation of temporary connection between two cortical centers. First, perceiving the conditional stimulus, and second, perceiving the unconditional one. Important role in the mechanism of interaction between different cortical regions play first cortico, subcortico, cortical pathways, and second, the dominant phenomenon when conditioned and unconditioned stimuli are combined, the excitation is summated. Nervous cells of both cortical regions are involved in a rhythmic activity. Circulation of impulses along the same neuronal chain ensures the formation of temporary connections. Functional changes are important only for brief impressions of traces of stimuli on the cortex. This is short-term memory. Long retention of temporary connections, long-term memory, is based on some molecular plastic changes taking place in the synapses and neurons. Biological importance of conditioned reflexes are very significant, very important. Reflex reactions appear a certain time before actual unconditioned stimulation, thus preparing the organism. Conditioned reflexes help to find food, to avoid dangers, as we said, in proper time, to eliminate harmful influences, etc. They are base for our habits. Reflexes may be applied in clinical and physiological practice. Inhibition of higher nervous activity. There are two types of inhibitions. First is external inhibition. Conditioned reflex is weakened or suppressed by simultaneous excitatory process. And second type of inhibition is internal inhibition, is inhibitory effects in the cortical center of conditioned reflex. There are four types of internal inhibition. First is extinction. Second, differential inhibition. Third, conditioned inhibition. And inhibition of delay. Temporary inhibition. Inhibitory effect arises in a new cortical center, not in centers involved into conditioned reflex. This is orientation reflex. We discussed about it. Any new stimulation suppresses current conditioned activity. Importance of its inhibition. Readiness to give response to a stimulus. Always we are ready to give some response to a stimulus due to this inhibition, temporary inhibition. Next type is extinction. If the conditioned stimulus is repeated without unconditioned base for several times, reflex becomes extinct, suppressed. Its importance: brain doesn't keep reflexes and habits which are not necessary. Next example of excitation. A dog has been previously conditioned to come when he hears a bell because he knows he will get food, but the previous handful of times the dog didn't receive food, so no longer comes when he hears the bell. And differential inhibition, next type of internal inhibition. Differential inhibition, firstly, conditioned response may be given to different stimuli, rather similar to conditioned stimulus. Generalization period in reflex activity. After several repetitions, response is given accurately to certain stimulus only. Others are inhibited in differential manner. Important, the base for our learning. And the next, last type of internal inhibition is inhibition of delay. If unconditioned base is delayed, the established conditioned reflex is inhibited. Importance of it: organism gives a response only to stimulus applied in proper time. Our next question or next topic is type of nervous system. Type of nervous system determines the rate at which conditioned reflexes are built, the strength and stability of these reflexes, the rate of irradiation and concentration of nerve process, greater or lesser susceptibility to various influences causing pathology in higher nervous activity. Nerve processes are characterized through first, strength of excitation and inhibition. How much time is required for building condition reflex and for how long time period. Second, equilibrium in excitation and inhibition. Excitatory or inhibitory reactions prevail. And the third is mobility of excitation and inhibition. How easily organism changes one reflex complex to the other if necessary. There are four general types of nervous system, and you know them. First type is choleric. Choleric, strong but unbalanced nerve processes characterized by predominance of excitation. Restless, aggressive, excitable, optimistic, and active. Sanguine. Sanguine, strong, well-balanced, highly mobile nerve processes. Sanguine person, sociable, talkative, contact, sympathetic, relaxed, cheerful, prone to lead, and not prone to anxiety. Phlegmatic. Phlegmatic, strong, well-balanced, but low mobile nerve processes. Phlegmatic person, very passive, cautious, thoughtful, friendly, manageable, credible, smooth, and quiet. Sanguines and phlegmatics emotions are very stable and they have balanced emotions. And melancholic, extremely weak development of both excitation and inhibition, unbalanced, and they are low mobile. Melancholic, easy to become frustrated, anxious, rigid, prone to arguments, pessimistic, reserved, unsociable, and quiet. Choleric and sanguine persons are most often extroversion, but melancholic and phlegmatic person are introversion person. There are four types of nervous system due to our domination of hemispheres. First type is thinking type with dominant left hemisphere. Second type is art type, the most often type of us of nervous system. Art type with dominant right hemisphere. Third is mixed type with equally developed functions of left and right hemispheres, and genius type with equally overdeveloped functions of left and right hemispheres. Next question is emotions. Emotion is a kind of psychophysiological phenomenon. It's a multifaceted form of behavior involving different somatic reactions, for example, smiling, laughing, running, etc. Variety of autonomic responses, heart rate changes, paleness, fainting, etc. Aspects of emotions. Cognitions. Cognition determines the emotion that in its type and degree is appropriate to given situation. Expression in form of somatic and autonomic activity during emotional state. Experience is the subjective aspect, basis for pleasant and unpleasant emotions, and excitement, may be delight or distress. Nerve control of emotions. Hypothalamus is often considered as the seat of emotions. Uh, it's the principal center where various components of emotional reactions are organized into definite pattern. Stimulation of different parts of hypothalamus shows different emotional reactions. Thalamus also control our emotions. Anterior nuclei, dorsomedial nucleus, posterior ventral nucleus are part of limbic system. Cerebral cortex and limbic system, amygdaloid nucleus complex, hippocampus, hypothalamus, thalamus, ancient cortex form circles, making possible prolonged analysis of information based for behavior and emotions. So, dear students, that's it. See you next lecture next week. Good luck. Bye bye.